Irish mythology is filled with terrifying creatures that haunt the land and waters of the Emerald Isle, but few are as fearsome or as mysterious as the Dobhar-Chú, also known as the king otter or the water hound. This creature is described as a large, bloodthirsty beast that dwells in lakes and rivers, resembling a mix between an otter and a hound, but far more terrifying. Some say it's as big as a small horse, with sleek black fur that glistens in the moonlight, and eyes that glow with a malevolent hunger. Its presence in Irish folklore stretches back centuries, with legends warning of its ferocity and cunning. The Dobhar-Chú is believed to be a predator unlike any other, capable of dragging humans to their deaths with terrifying speed and strength. It is known for its unrelenting nature. Once it has chosen its prey, there is no escape. Many Irish legends tell of lone travelers or even groups of people being hunted down by the beast near remote lakes or rivers. What makes the Dobhar-Chú even more frightening is that it is said to be part of a pair. If you manage to kill one, its mate will come for you with a vengeance, more savage and determined than the first. Tonight we dive into the chilling tale of one man's encounter with the Dobhar-Chú. What begins as a peaceful trip to a remote Irish lake turns into a nightmarish fight for survival. So sit back and prepare yourself for a harrowing journey into the dark waters where the Dobhar-Chú lurks. It was late autumn when Gareth O'Brien decided to venture into the rugged wilderness of County Leitrim for a much-needed escape. Life in the city had become unbearable, with the constant noise, crowds, and a job that drained every ounce of energy from him. Gareth longed for the peace and quiet of the Irish countryside, where he could hike for hours without seeing a single soul, where the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the soft murmur of water. He had chosen his destination carefully, an isolated lake deep in the heart of the mountains. The locals called it Lough Dubh, the Black Lake, but Gareth had heard little about it beyond the fact that it was difficult to reach and rarely visited by tourists. That was exactly what he wanted: solitude. On a chilly Friday morning, Gareth packed his gear, loaded up his old beat-up car, and set off. The drive took longer than expected, the roads narrowing as he climbed higher into the mountains, until they became little more than dirt paths winding through dense forests. By the time he arrived at the trailhead, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape. He grabbed his backpack and set out on foot, following a narrow trail that snaked its way toward the lake. As he walked, the sense of isolation grew. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Gareth breathed it all in, relishing the quiet, but as the path descended toward Lough Dubh, the atmosphere seemed to change. The forest grew darker, the shadows deeper, and the air colder. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of hiking, Gareth reached the lake. It was as remote and untouched as he had imagined. The water was dark, reflecting the gray sky above like a mirror, and the surrounding hills loomed like silent sentinels. He set up his small tent near the water's edge, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction at having the entire place to himself, or so he thought. The first night was uneventful, and Gareth slept soundly, lulled by the rhythmic sound of the wind and the distant hoot of an owl. The next morning he spent hours exploring the area, hiking along the shoreline, and taking in the wild beauty of the landscape. There was something undeniably peaceful about the place, though Gareth couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every so often he would pause, turning around quickly, but saw nothing, just the endless stretch of dark water and the towering trees beyond. That evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened once more, Gareth sat by the lake, watching the water ripple gently under the breeze. He tossed a few stones in, watching them skip across the surface, when something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a large fish, something moving just beneath the surface, but as he peered closer, he saw it wasn't a fish at all. It was larger, much larger. A dark, sleek shape glided through the water with unnatural grace, barely disturbing the surface as it moved. For a moment, Gareth's breath caught in his throat. It was too far away to make out clearly, but whatever it was big. And then it vanished beneath the water. Gareth stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The stories of the Dobhar-Chú flashed through his mind, but he shook them off. Those were just legends, old wives' tales meant to scare children. This was the 21st century, and he wasn't about to let some mythological nonsense ruin his weekend. Still, a sense of unease settled over him. He quickly gathered his things and retreated to his tent, zipping it shut as if that thin layer of fabric would offer any real protection. The night dragged on, and despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. Every rustle of the wind, every splash of the water outside made him jump. The creature he had seen earlier haunted his thoughts, its dark shape replaying over and over again in his mind. Sometime after midnight, Gareth woke with a start. At first he wasn't sure what had disturbed him. Everything was quiet, too quiet. He lay still, listening intently. The wind had stopped, and the only sound was the soft lapping of the water against the shore. But then he heard it. Something else. Something heavy moving just outside his tent. His heart raced as he sat up, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, closer. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. And then, a low growl. Gareth's blood turned to ice. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hands trembling as he switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the inside of the tent, but outside was still pitch black. The growling grew louder, more menacing, as something large brushed against the side of the tent. Without thinking, Gareth unzipped the door and shone his flashlight outside. The beam swept across the shore, and for a moment he saw nothing. But then his light landed on it. The Dobhar-Chú. It stood at the water's edge, half in the lake, half on land. It was massive, its sleek black fur glistening in the moonlight, water dripping from its muscular body. Its eyes were glowing, burning with an unnatural light, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth, bared in a snarl. The creature looked like a monstrous blend of an otter and a hound, its body low and coiled, ready to strike. For a moment, Gareth was frozen, unable to move. The stories were true. The Dobhar-Chú was real, and it was standing right in front of him, its gaze fixed on him with a hunger that made his blood run cold. And then it charged. Gareth barely had time to react. He stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight as the Dobhar-Chú lunged at him with terrifying speed. Its massive body collided with his, knocking the wind out of him as they crashed to the ground. He could feel its claws digging into his chest, its hot breath on his face as it snarled, jaws snapping just inches from his throat. Desperation kicked in, and Gareth lashed out, grabbing a rock from the ground and swinging it with all his strength. The stone struck the creature's head with a sickening crack, and the Dobhar-Chú let out a roar of pain, staggering back. Blood dripped from its head, but it wasn't enough to stop it. It recovered quickly, its glowing eyes narrowing in rage. Gareth scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no way to defend himself. He could hear the creature circling him, its low growls filling the night air. His only chance was to run. Without looking back, Gareth sprinted toward the trees, his heart pounding in his chest. The Dobhar-Chú was right behind him, its heavy footsteps thundering across the ground. Branches whipped at his face as he ran through the forest, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting away. But no matter how fast he ran, the creature was faster. He could hear it gaining on him, its growls turning into a deafening roar. And then he felt it, a searing pain as the Dobhar-Chú's claws raked across his back, sending him crashing to the ground. Gareth gasped in pain, struggling to crawl away, but the Dobhar-Chú was on him in an instant, pinning him down with its massive body. He felt its teeth sink into his shoulder, the agony blinding him as he screamed. But just as he thought it was over, a second growl pierced the night air, this one even louder, more feral. The Dobhar-Chú released him, its head snapping up as it turned toward the lake. Gareth, barely able to move, watched in horror as another figure emerged from the water. It was the Dobhar-Chú's mate. The second creature was even larger than the first, its eyes burning with an intense fury. The two beasts circled Gareth, their snarls filling the night with an animalistic rage. There was no escape. The Dobhar-Chú's mate lunged first, its claws raking through the air, but just as it was about to strike, a deafening gunshot echoed through the forest. Gareth's vision blurred as he heard the sound of another gunshot, followed by a guttural yelp of pain. He could barely make out the figure of a man standing on the ridge above, rifle in hand. The first Dobhar-Chú collapsed to the ground, twitching as blood pooled beneath it. The second beast let out a furious roar, charging toward the shooter, but another shot rang out and the creature fell dead beside its mate. Gareth lay still, gasping for breath, his body trembling with pain and fear. The man approached cautiously, lowering his rifle as he knelt beside him. "You're lucky I heard the commotion," the man said, his voice rough and low. "I've been hunting these things for years." The man helped Gareth to his feet, though his body screamed in protest. Together they made their way back to the man's small cabin deep in the forest, where Gareth collapsed on the floor, his mind reeling from the nightmare he had just survived. "I thought they were just legends," Gareth muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The man shook his head, his expression grim. "They're real, and they're not the only ones out there." Gareth never returned to the city after that night. He stayed in the wilderness, far from civilization, always watching the water, always listening for the low growl of the Dobhar-Chú. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale of the Dobhar-Chú, one of the most fearsome creatures in Irish mythology, don't forget to leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more horrifying stories of folklore and myth. Share your thoughts about the Dobhar-Chú, and let us know what legends you want to hear next. And remember, if you ever find yourself near a lonely lake in the Irish wilderness, be sure to watch the water. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.